So today I'm talking to you about something that affects almost every woman I work with, but they don't have a name for it. I call it the lonely perfectionist crisis. It's when you're succeeding everywhere except in relational intimacy and real friendship. You navigate work relationships just fine, and you've mastered influence, strategic empathy, and the polished communication that gets you visible and gets you promoted. But you struggle to drop your armor and share your real, authentic self with full vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities that are needed to forge deeply connected personal relationships. How many people actually know you without your mask on? Do you know you without your mask on? So what does the lonely perfectionist crisis actually look like? It's when you believe you have to be perfect to keep friends, because somewhere along the way you learned you weren't inherently good enough and your acceptance was based on getting everything right. And it's when vulnerability feels dangerous because being strong kept you safe and you've been the strong one for so long. Or when other women demand that you open up because your strength makes them feel uncomfortable. And if you watched my video, How Strong Women Are Tricked into Fake Vulnerability, then you know exactly what I mean. Not everyone who asks for your vulnerability has earned the right to receive it. I see this constantly in my coaching practice, and I have lived it myself for years. When I was in my earlier corporate days, I remember being surrounded by people at work events where I could put on my work mask, but it had defined parameters. I knew the rules. But in my personal relationships, I felt like I was in a straitjacket. I felt and believed there was no room to be imperfect and loved at the same time. And this made it difficult for me to access and acknowledge my real feelings and ultimately truly connect. What changed everything for me was realizing I had a perfectionism mindset. And we often think that this only applies to tasks and work, but it also can apply to relationships too. On the surface, perfectionism looks like someone who just wants to do things right. But underneath all of that, I believe that my acceptance, my worth, and my approval, which as social beings, your brain interprets as your very survival and safety, depended on performing perfectly and living up to other people's expectations. Apart from realizing I had a perfectionist mindset towards my relationships, I also had to start recognizing which people in my life reinforced this belief, whether they meant to or not. Some relationships were keeping me stuck in that performance mode, and they can come from places you least expect. But the biggest shift is understanding that relational intimacy, including platonic and non-platonic, require a different kind of effort than work. At work, you strategize and you set goals and measure outcomes. But in friendship, the effort is about showing up and showing up as yourself, your imperfect self. The effort is the authenticity, which is not always perfect. It's not about impressing anyone or trying to influence how they perceive you so they won't reject you. And it's also not about trying to control the outcomes. It's about being present and emotionally available. And once I understood that perfectionism and overachievement were actually about survival and not standards, and I've seen my clients get this too, we started noticing patterns everywhere. This lonely perfectionist crisis shows up in really specific patterns. So as we dive into these patterns, remember 3 things. First, your perfectionism is a survival mechanism. Second, certain relationships will keep you stuck there. And third, friendship needs authentic presence, not performance. So the first pattern underlying the lonely perfectionist crisis is usually the core one, it's the fundamental one, and that is believing you have to earn your place in every friendship. This is what's called contingent self-worth, where you believe your value depends entirely on what you achieve. For overachievers and perfectionists, this means feeling good about yourself requires earning it somehow. And this can show up in ways that aren't immediately obvious. For instance, in friendships, this could look like keeping mental track of everything you do for people. For instance, one client told me she had this subconscious running tally in her head. And she spoke about how she'd planned her friend's birthday, helped with her move, listened to her share her relationship drama and issues for hours. And to be clear, this wasn't about her keeping record of all the things she had done. No. this was not about her keeping score. This was because she needed evidence that she deserved to be there and deserved to have certain expectations from the friendship. And this was only discovered as we dug deeper. Another client I remember once told me she actually kept a mental spreadsheet. You know, if her friend did something nice, she'd immediately think, oh, now I owe her. Now I've got to give back to her in some way. She couldn't just receive kindness. It became a debt she had to repay, something she had to now perform well in. And therefore, people showing her kindness brought her a lot of anxiety and stress. This pattern can also look like just overcompensating if you don't feel you've done enough lately, or you don't feel you've earned your position in the friendship. And this could be exhausting because you're not giving from love. You're giving from a fear that you don't deserve to have that love and acceptance in the friendship, or from a fear that you will lose it. So how does this pattern actually destroy friendships? So first, you might withdraw when you can't contribute enough, or when you've not been good enough, you feel you don't deserve to be around. Second, you might exhaust yourself by overcompensating a lot of the time. And the third one is the real killer. You can get resentful when your efforts aren't recognized or reciprocated. Not because you want genuine mutual care, but because you need proof that you've earned your place and that you're worthy of it. The second pattern flows right from the first, and it's about if your worth depends on being perfect, then you can never let anyone see you struggle. So you become the strong one, the one everyone else leans on, but who never needs anything. This comes from something called self-oriented perfectionism. And you're really essentially hiding anything messy or real about you. Your friends ask if you're okay, and even though you're struggling, you'll probably just say, I'm fine. You could have been crying on your sofa at the moment a friend calls you, but you answer as though everything's perfect and fine. If you remember in my last video, the vulnerability strategy strong women need to know, when I talked about the 4 levels of connection, it means that you're probably usually stuck at level 1 or 2 in this pattern. You're sharing facts and surface opinions, but you do desperately want the support and intimacy that only comes from level 4, but you're terrified. So how does this pattern destroy friendships? Well, first, your friends can't support you because they don't know you need it. Second, they sense something is off, that you're not being completely honest with them, and that can create distance. And third, you end up being exhausted from performing, saying I'm fine all the time when you're actually drowning in work or you're overwhelmed. So the third pattern adds another layer to what we just discussed, and that's also around socially prescribed perfectionism. And this is where you believe everyone expects perfection from you. And by everyone, I mean everyone. You know, your boss, your colleagues, your parents, your friends, and your social circle. You feel they all need to see you as successful. You become the one everyone comes to for advice because you want them to believe you've got it all figured out. The issue with this, though, is that it means you're constantly on. You're always managing your words, your emotions, and your image. For women from minority backgrounds, this pressure intensifies dramatically. Studies show minority women face something called a perfectionism paradox. And that comes from the message that is drummed into their head that they have to work twice as hard to be seen as equally competent. And any mistake gets judged more harshly. And this isn't just a message that is drummed into them. This is an experience that they have. So that mask that you wear at work, it never comes off because you believe these things for every facet of your life, that you must perform better than others, that any mistake will be judged more harshly, and there is no room for error. The exhaustion from that is real. You literally struggle to access your authentic self because you've been in performance mode for so long. So how does this pattern destroy friendships? Well, first, you become whoever you think people want you to be, and you're losing yourself in the process. Or perhaps friends never know which version of you they're going to get, which can create confusion or distance. And another way it can destroy friendships is you ultimately end up attracting people who love your performance, not your person. So even when you have friends, you're still alone because they don't know the real you exists, and they don't care to because you also don't care to. This fourth pattern can be really frustrating for some of my clients, and I've also experienced it myself. And when I point it out to them, they always say that I've hit the nail on the head. Sometimes when you try to connect, your very strength, becomes the problem. Research shows us that women engage in something called covert competition. And this is indirect rivalry through comparison, subtle put downs, and social undermining rather than direct confrontation. And the subtle things can be the hardest to call out, right? So other women see your success or your outward strength and feel threatened. So they demand vulnerability from you, not because they care, but because they need to level the playing field. Do you remember what we talked about in the fake vulnerability video that I did? So this means they'll say things like, you never open up, or you think you're better than us. And they want you to share something that they perceive makes you smaller so they can feel bigger. Sometimes it's even subtler than this. Maybe they'll minimize your achievements, or they'll make backhanded compliments, or constantly redirect conversations to their own struggles or themselves when you're sharing your wins and your successes. And your response will be to either overshare to prove that you're normal and that you're not cold and that you are vulnerable and open with them, which can feel really terrible, or you withdraw completely. So how does this pattern destroy friendships? First, you stop sharing your joys and your highs because it triggers other people's insecurities. Second, you attract friends who need you to be less so that they can feel like more. And third, you never experience the celebration and support real friends should provide. And this can leave you being successful outwardly or being strong outwardly, but emotionally starved. The fifth and final pattern of the lonely perfectionist crisis is about judging others by your standards. And the uncomfortable truth is that while we're afraid of being judged, we're also judging others. This sits under the umbrella of something called other-oriented perfectionism. And it means we impose our high standards on friends or other people generally. Maybe your friend forgets to ask about your important meeting, for instance, and you think, oh, I would never forget that. I always remember everything. Or perhaps you secretly judge their lack of ambition. And this often manifests in either outward criticism, silent resentment, or distancing yourself. You become the very judge that you fear, and you end up creating the lonely dynamics that you hate and don't want. So how does this destroy friendships? Well, first, your friends feel like they can never measure up, just like how you feel inside. Second, you push away anyone who isn't as driven or detail-oriented as you, perhaps. And that can really limit your circle to other exhausted perfectionists and overachievers. And third, you miss out on what good enough friends could teach you, like how to relax and play and just be human. So I wonder, do you recognize yourself in any of these patterns? Not all will necessarily relate to you. And can you see how they have impacted any of your friendships or relationships generally? Do drop a comment below and let me know what comes up for you. What pattern hit home the hardest? So as you know, in pretty much all my videos, I do a reflective audit, which is just a series of coaching style questions to help you see where to focus. So question 1 is, which pattern shows up most in your friendships and why do you think it happens? Are you subconsciously calculating what you've done to deserve their friendship? Are you hiding your struggles behind I'm fine all the time and always feeling like you have to perform? Or do you perhaps get triggered when others want you to be vulnerable? Or do you experience this unhealthy pressure from them to be vulnerable and do it to fit in? Just notice which one feels most familiar and think about why it could happen. The next question is, what's the cost of this pattern for you? Maybe you're exhausted from performing and you actually find you're tired a lot of the time. Maybe you feel unknown despite having a lot of friends around you. Or it could be that you're lonely because there's no one to celebrate your wins and successes with. What is this pattern actually costing you in terms of connection and peace? Question 3, what would need to be true for you to let this pattern go? Would you need to believe you're worthy without achieving? Would you need friends who don't compete with you? Would you need to trust that people won't use your vulnerability against you? What's the core belief or condition that would help you feel safe enough to drop this pattern and to discard it once and for all? These are important to think through because once you see your pattern clearly and understand what's keeping you stuck in it, then you can actually change it. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do in the next video. Until then, keep mastering what matters most.